The latest indications tell us inflation is cooling. But what happens when it cools too quickly? To answer that question, we're going to revisit our custom recession indicator series today, part 3, CPI inflation. It's a very timely topic as this week we have a lot of inflation data. As a reminder, this is based on our examination of the SAHM rule. It measures the acceleration in the unemployment rate. See, it's not so important whether the unemployment rate is 4% or 4.1, but how fast during a recession the unemployment rate starts to spike. That's what this rule captures. For example, we see here in blue, that's the unemployment rate going back several decades. The gray areas in the background, the gray histogram bars, that shows us the recessions that took place, and those recessions are identified by the spike, the acceleration in the unemployment rate. For example, 2001, left-hand side, unemployment rate spiked, and that spike was enough. Technically, it's a 0.5% spike in the unemployment rates. That shows us the recession. It happened again in 2008. It happened again in the COVID crisis, 2020. So the unemployment rate spikes. That's when we see the trigger for the SAHM rule. The reason why we're talking about this is because last month's employment data gave us, again, a trigger, a positive trigger in the SAHM rule. The first one we've seen actually in several years. And this only happens once every several years or so. So it's important that we talk about it. Well, today we're going to apply the SAHM rule, a little an unconventional method, to the CPI data instead. Now, in this case, what we're doing is we're measuring a rapid decline in inflation. Inflation's coming down, prices are coming down. But what happens when prices go down very, very quickly? That can be a sign of a recession. Well, in yellow, we have the CPI spread. What is that? We're going to define it for you in just a moment. The gray area bars in the background, that shows us those periods of time of a recession that were identified by the original application, the proper application of the SAHM rule. But we're going to see that the CPI collapses during those periods of time that the SAHM rule identified a spike in the unemployment. A recession occurs, unemployment rate spikes higher, CPI collapses. So, for example, taking a look at the CPI spread in 2008, 2009, we spiked up to 3.1%. In 2015, it went up to 0.9%. Now, 2015 was not a recession. There was an economic slowdown. Notice the difference. It went up 3% in 2008, only 0.9% in 2015. More recently, in 2020, COVID crisis, we had a 1% spike, and that was an actual official recession at that point. So we can see it doesn't happen that often, but it does correlate very closely with those periods of recession that were identified by a spike in unemployment. How do we identify the CPI spread? It's very simply a comparison of moving averages. It's a comparison of the long-term 12-month moving average of the CPI data versus a short-term 3-month moving average of the CPI data. We basically take the highest high of the average CPI over the past 12 months, and from that subtract the 3-month moving average of that CPI. We're looking for a change where the 3-month is going to move a lot faster than the 12-month. Well, this is where we are right now. The blue histogram bars show us negative readings. At the moment, we see a trend moving to the upside. In April, negative 0.4%. May, 0.2%. June, negative 0.1%. So notice as inflation's coming down, the difference between the 12-month and the 3-month, it's tightening, but it's starting to accelerate to the downside. How does this work in the past? Very simply. In 2008, yellow, by the way, that's the S&P 500. In blue, that's the CPI spread. Notice in 2008, we went from negative territory in July, 0.8%, August, 0.5%, eventually turning to the upside during the crash. 0.3% positive reading in October, November, 1.2%. So we see in the worst part of the 2008 financial crisis, the recession, we see the CPI spread turn positive as stocks collapsed. More recently, 2020, as the stock market collapsed, we saw a negative CPI spread again turn positive. So it's as the number turns positive, and especially when it breaks above a 1% threshold on the CPI spread, that identifies the same period of time that was identified with the original application of the SAHM rule. This is where we are right now. Again, in April, 0.4% to the downside, May 0.2, last month 0.1%. It'll be very interesting to see indeed if this month's CPI data is low enough that it'll actually move this into the positive territory. And that certainly is very important. It's healthy that the CPI comes down. We want inflation to come down, but we don't want it to come down too quickly, because that would be a sign that maybe the economy is cooling too quickly, and that would be an early precursor to a recession. We'll give you a link here to all the videos that discuss the SAM rule application in our own way. And we also talk about the manufacturing data and the housing data as it fits into this SAM rule template. We hope this has been helpful. We look forward to seeing you back soon.